Indie Uproar UFO 50. I've mentioned before in other videos that I grew up with the NES as my first console, but I'm not blind to the fact that several decades and plenty of steps forward in both technology and design ideology for games has led to that era of games mostly feeling dated. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of great games on the system, but there's no denying that the limitations and the relative newness of the entire medium did lead to a lot of NES games feeling more frustrating than anything else. However, UFO 50 here is a very special sort of project, the kind that manages to appeal to the nostalgia of those that grew up during that time period, while still creating games that feel fresh, new, and fun to anyone who plays this collection, regardless of their history with gaming. It is at once a celebration of where video games have been, while also a demonstration of what one can do with simple ideas and limitations, while not beholding themselves to the strictness of said limitations in the early days. UFO 50, created and published by the studio responsible for the Spelunky duology, Mossmouth, is a collection of 50 original games inspired by games from back during the NES and Master System era. It presents the collection as a fictional restoration project by a group of superfans of a fictional game developer called UFO Soft, presenting itself as a collection and remastering of their entire library of 50 games, released over the course of the 80s. I rather like this, as it gives a fun little meta context to the collection, rather than just being Mossmouth showing off. They absolutely are showing off, of course, but the choice to present this as sort of a museum for a developer that didn't even really exist is a fascinating idea. It goes beyond the aesthetic as well. If you go through the games in chronological order, you can actually see the improvement in both quality of the games and their complexity, going from games that don't even have any sort of introduction or title screen to the elaborate, more story-rich and detailed games, literally showing a progression from the early days of a platform to its much later ones. For anyone who has gotten the chance to watch the evolution of games on a console from the beginning to the end, you know this feeling pretty well, seeing how later games in a console's library are able to take much better advantage of everything that the console has to offer, rather than early on, when games had to be more cautious, because no one quite knew how far they could push the hardware. Now that's already pretty cool, but it'd mostly just be a nice little story if it weren't for the fact that every single game in this collection was a freaking banger. Almost all of them. Did I stutter? The games do take a lot of inspiration from pre-existing ones, but it's more in the idea that they take some basic mechanics here and there, and then put huge twists on them, or provide unique scenarios for well-trodden ground. Mortolia, for example, is a basic level-by-level platformer, but its big twist is that every life is an individual soldier that you are required to sacrifice in various creative ways in order to clear a way to progress for the future playable characters. Magic Garden is an intense take on the classic game of Snake. Devolition is an addictive game of chain reaction. That's not even getting into how there are sequels to previous games in the collection, and many of those sequels are totally different from the games that came before them. Now, the fact that there are so many games and all of them are fun, that's already amazing, honestly. But there's also the fact that there is such a massive breadth of genres and experiences here. Look, while objectively every game in the collection is good, maybe even great, well, okay, there are exceptions, I'm being a little bit hyperbolic there, there isn't any accounting for taste, and not every game or genre is going to be to everyone's liking. But I would go as far as to say that you're going to find at least a handful of games that really speak to you, regardless of what your interests are. If one game doesn't catch you, it's pretty much guaranteed that there will be two others that do. Now, I mentioned before that the games do limit themselves in some ways, but it's primarily in ways of control and aesthetic. None of the games in this collection use more than 2 buttons, with most of the ones that require extra actions having some sort of combination between the directional buttons and one of the 2 face buttons you have access to. Aesthetically, the games don't look similar per se, unless it's intentional, but many of the games tend to use similar color palettes, and you can see certain creature and object designs being reused in several different games, like how the flying saucer, basically the mascot for the UFO Soft studio, shows up in quite a few of their games, either being directly controlled by the player or as an element that you'll run into from time to time. I want to make it clear that this isn't a negative. It kind of reminds me of how a lot of long-running developers kind of had calling cards in their visual design. While there are some exceptions, when you see a classic Capcom game, it just looks like a Capcom game, you know? Classic Nintendo games look like games made by Nintendo. I'm not sure if that description is all that helpful, but look at it this way. These are all meant to be NES-era video games, all made by a very prolific but forgotten developer. The fact that all these games share a visual language in this way gives the collection a sense of cohesion where, despite the fact that every game is so different, they all feel pretty unified. They all feel like they belong. I suppose Smash Bros. Would be an apt comparison in that way. Smash Bros. Is a series that brings together a lot of disparate characters from a lot of different genres of games, and yet manages to make them look like they belong together in the same space. That's the kind of feeling I get here. All the games are different genres in different years, different gameplay styles, but all of them feel like they're cut from the same cloth. All the games have endings, too. Even ones that are more arcade-esque in nature do eventually have endpoints that you can reach, and that's actually one of the challenges that the collection puts forward for you. If you manage to beat a game, its cartridge will turn gold on the selection screen, indicating that you've reached its ending. There are also gifts to grab and cherry challenges to complete, oftentimes giving you a greater challenge than just completing them normally, like beating Barbuta while still having all 6 lives, or beating Rail Heist with at least 40 stars. Of course, all of these are completely optional. You don't have to do them to get the full experience, but for the completionist and those who really want to challenge themselves, they're there if you really want to try them and learn how to master each game individually, though it should be stressed that every game can easily be enjoyed casually as well. And if you're looking for the ultimate casual challenge, every game allows you to access a terminal from the menu where you can input codes, like you would for Game Genies back on the NES and Genesis, to give yourself various advantages, like level selects, more or infinite lives, invulnerability. But there are also codes that can increase the challenge even further if you really want to, like changing module selections in Bug Hunter, or disabling bonuses in Magic Garden, or starting with no townsfolk in Devolition. You've probably already heard from plenty of other people out there how amazing and fleshed out this collection is, and yeah, I agree with them. Apparently, the development team for this compilation spent 8 years putting this collection together, and if that's the case, it's no wonder all of these games feel so fleshed out on their own. And yes, the collection isn't flawless. There are a few games that I found a little bit more on the frustrating end of things, and there are a few that are tough to figure out and that can feel a bit frustrating to play the first time until you either figure things out or look up what to do. I will say that I think that's meant to be part of the appeal, considering that many retro games, you didn't really get endgame tutorials or explanations for mechanics. You either figured it out on your own or you read the manual, which if you bought the game used, you probably didn't have. Whether or not it's charming or annoying is going to be up to personal taste, but I will say that I don't think any of the games are so complex on their own that you can't eventually figure out what you're supposed to do with, like, say, half an hour of just trying everything available to you. And even after you get the basics down, odds are good that you'll discover some interesting quirks in each game as you continue to play them more and more. And I want to do that, so I'm gonna keep talking about these games a bit more. That's the one downside to this particular format of videos, as I can't really go into too much depth on the individual titles and my opinions on them in so short a time frame. UFO 50 as a full package is absolutely worth your time and money, but every game is so different from one another that they're all worth taking on and talking about individually. Heck, I could probably get an entire Quickies episode out of every individual game on this collection. That's how much depth and complexity there is to them. In fact, oh boy, get ready for a marathon, folks.